Okay, now with a good understanding of just what ethos is, the character you create, especially, we can talk about a very important factor in creating that character, and that is the issue of rhetorical distance. Voice is certainly an important part of it, right? Especially, the tone that you create when you're writing messages and, papers and things like that, the way you speak to other people. We certainly know that voice and the things that you say, the way you say them, can certainly be at least as important, if sometimes more important than what you're actually the content of what you're saying. So the way you present ideas is very important, and so is this aspect, this very important idea called rhetorical distance. And rhetorical distance is that degree of physical and more importantly, more prominently, the social separation between the speaker and the audience. What is that space between you and who you're talking to? And a lot of factors go into affecting that, and the character that you create, and how important it is to reach that audience, and the tools that you use, not just the words you say, but that's certainly part of it. The way you speak to people and how you address them is an important issue called rhetorical distance, right? So let us sort of play a fun, quick game here. As the distance between you and the audience, you as a speaker and the audience decreases, what do you think that does for the level of persuasiveness? That go increase? The amount of how persuasive you are as the distance between you and your audience increases, does that ability to persuade increase or decrease as well? If you said increase, congratulations, you won round one. As the distance decreases between you and your audience as a speaker or communicator, generally the amount of persuasiveness increases. As you bridge that gap, the distance between you and your audience, you get closer to your audience in content and understanding. The ability to persuade usually increases. And so, as you can probably figure out then, as that distance increases, as there's more space, social separation between you and your audience, for whatever reason, that will of course negatively affect, most likely, your ability to persuade. That's not, these are very broad guidelines, but there certainly are important times, depending on who you're talking with or how you're communicating, that a definite amount of distance is necessary, and that may sort of make persuasion more difficult, but sometimes having that right appropriate social distance between you and your audience is an important factor as well. Okay, especially for those of you like ministry team leaders, during the school day when you're talking to people individually, you can certainly have a level of familiarity. That distance can be decreased, but if you are speaking to younger students, especially as an authority figure, then you have to really, at times, increase that distance. And it may be more difficult for you to communicate what you want to say. You can't be as familiar with them when you're in that position of authority. You have to increase that distance, and persuasiveness might decrease, but it's still important to maintain that distance. So both of these factors of distance and persuasiveness are crucial ideas, and try to find, for whatever situation, the appropriate balance. Okay. So there are a lot of different ways that you create your character, create that distance. The grammar that you use, first person, second person, third person. There are different times and places when you will use different sorts of grammar, and the things you say, public speaking sort of role, or as you write your papers. Now, most of the time in English class we've said keep it on third person and not first person, but there will be times certainly. Like when you're using appeals to your own character here in Ethos, you'll need to say, I am qualified, I have done this. And first person will be necessary, right? And metonymy, as you may recall, increases that distance as well. When you are using words that are related to the other idea, metonymy, as you may recall, is that, separation of, substitution of an idea for a closely related idea, right? As we've talked about this in English class already, that instead of saying the president said, a message came from the White House, we substitute White House for president and sort of increases that distance. And so we know literally the White House did not speak since it's just an inanimate building, but we say through metonymy, the White House gave this message, things like that. Okay. So when you're using first and second person, what do you think that does for distance? That's right. It decreases that distance. It increases that persuasiveness. You and the audience are more connected. You're directly addressing, you're speaking of yourself as a real person involved. You're directly addressing the audience, that you and the audience are both actively involved in what is happening. Third person, there we go, increases that distance, but that can be important as well, right? As we said, there's times when increasing that distance between you and your audience, that character that you're creating in that situation, you might want to come off as more authoritative than just on the same level with the audience. Like you are there are times when you are telling them, I know what I'm talking about, listen to me, I'm talking about this issue, it's not about me and it's not about you, but I am qualified because third person focuses on the issues, and that's what we've usually done in English class. In a lot of your papers, it's been focusing on the ideas. Don't get yourself personally involved. You are communicating what is true to your audience. And so third person grammar usually keeps that focus there. So when it's not about you as much, when it's not about the audience as human beings, just as receivers of this information, that is often the time when you'd go for third person pronouns and things like that. Okay. First and second person, very helpful for small gatherings and close proximity. And as we said, will generally increase that intimacy, increase that persuasiveness, decrease that distance. But on the other hand, if you are, if that position of authority and sort of intimacy is abused, that, first and second person, especially when you use you in like a commanding sort of way, it can be offensive and cold. So that's something you have to be careful. First and second person doesn't automatically make it, very, good as a persuasive tool. As careful on how you use it. So, there's a reason why the Constitution begins with "we the people." Right? It's not just us, the farmers, the landowners, the people with money and position and power. We are telling you this, and this is the kind of country that we're going to make. It's we the people. We are all in this together, which is a good use of second person. We are doing this together, and not they, to make that distance too much. Okay, so when it's us and them, there's a responsibility that we are involved in this, and there's an other, them, that sort of intentional separation. Say, hey, we're together, we're the us, but then there's a higher degree of responsibility that you are involved in what the audience is now supposed to believe. Okay, and second person, like you just do it. A lot of advertisements will say, use second person, like Allstate, you're in good hands. So give you coziness, like you're involved, we are with you, we know what you're doing. There's sorts of things, but as we said, if second person is used too much, you people over there, you have to do this. People don't usually like being directed and ordered about, and so unless you're obviously giving like a direction speech on how to do something, using second person can be a very difficult thing to use correctly. So it's something to be cautious and use, better done with practice. Okay, so third person, as we said, keeps that distance. The issue is what is really involved here. Has some positive aspects, as we said: objectivity, authority, and force. And depending on the situation, those can be pretty effective. Most of the time in your thesis paper and in your presentation, you will definitely in the paper use a great deal of third person. There will be times, as we said, for first person when your personal qualifications and experience are involved, but a lot of the time keeping it third person focuses on those ideas. You're communicating to the audience, this is how it is, it's not about me, it's not my opinion, this is how the situation is, this is a fact. And that sort of objectivity increases that distance, but that is sometimes really important. Okay, one potential drawback or benefit is that third person sort of puts the responsibility for what is being said away from you as the communicator. Like, this is just how it is, it's not about me. And especially as you go out and maybe evangelize to people in the years and months ahead who at college or whatever who don't know Jesus. You can focus on, this is the truth of the matter. It's not about me. It's not necessarily about what I believe. This is what is true. This is what the Bible says. This is how reality actually is. And so that gives you a little bit of sort of a break from taking the responsibility of the content, because it's not something that you've made up. It's not about you. So a lot of people, maybe in the future at college, you will maybe have some classes that say you should use first person because they want you to be responsible for the ideas that you're presenting. And I'm sure by now you'll have that experience and you'll know how to switch gears from third person to first person, especially as you practice doing it a little bit here with this thesis paper in the months ahead. All right. So grammar is important. Verb tenses is another important way of creating that character, trying to find that right amount of distance. As we've said throughout our years in English class, it's often better to use present tense, even as much as you can when talking about the past. Keep things present. Don't say Achilles did that, Achilles does this. And by saying does, even though it's something that happened thousands of years ago, it gives that sense of immediacy. Your audience is involved. There are things that are happening, right before their eyes, in their imaginations right now. Present tense verbs, more often than not, really are more engaging for the audience and the reader, especially reading your papers, especially even analytical papers, and certainly this thesis. But you want to, as much as possible, use present tense. You will need to use past tense verbs, especially when you're talking about the history of the idea. You will talk about things that happened in the 19th century. You can easily talk about those things that have happened, and we need to know them and how we got to where we are right now. And that's fine. You will shift from present to past, a couple of times throughout the paper, but especially in intentional sections like that. But whenever you can, use present tense, and that's really important. Okay, and similarly with verbs, we've got active voice and passive voice, and we've talked about this a little bit, and it's fairly easy to tell the difference. Active voice, the rhetorical subject is the same as the grammatical subject, right? The Marines took the hill is active voice. Passive voice, the hill was taken by the Marines, right? The rhetorical subject is not the same as the grammatical subject. The hill is just standing there. He's not doing the verb, right? It is not doing the verb, right? If it's a male hill, I guess. But if the hill was taken by the Marines are doing the action, even though the grammatical subject, the hill, is there. So that's passive voice, as you can see here, explicit or implicit by the is by the Marines. You can tell that's a passive voice. So generally, if sometimes you do like spell check or grammar check on your papers, sometimes that score will pop up, like you have 27% passive voice sentences. Usually as much as possible, you want to try to rephrase your sentences so they're active voice, keeping that grammar and rhetoric aligned. And so nice active verbs, present tense active verbs, really can be very effective when you're talking about all sorts of papers, not just this thesis, but in the years ahead, especially writing college papers, present tense action and active verbs are often the way to go. All right. So there's two important ways of creating that character using rhetorical distance through grammar and verb tense, and we will pause there and start a new video, some more important things about invented ethos, in just a moment. See you soon.